How, in God's name, did we get into this situation? How did we end up like this? 2018, 2019 were so good years. Everybody was having a good time, were having a good life. You could see it on the Instagram accounts. Everybody was joyful, partying, vacationing, and then 2020 comes along. COVID pandemic comes, and it's taking 2 years from our lives. And then war comes. Who failed you and what you need to do to stop this? These are the questions that we are going to try to answer.
You know it sounds funny, but I just can't stand the pain.
Disclaimer: I'm not a fan of Putin, I'm not a fan of Russia, I'm not a fan of NATO, I'm not a fan of Biden or the United States, I'm not a fan of the Middle East, I am not a fan.
New Year's Day 1918 was bleak. When is this awful nightmare going to end? The country is getting tired out. People no longer talk of war. They are saturated with it. When are we going to lead our proper lives? Shall we ever do so again?
The Russians have taken a lot of suffering. They have suffered in World War I, they have suffered in World War II, they have suffered during the Russian Revolution, and they have suffered during the Stalin takeover. So they are a people that can take a lot.
From a saluting base on Lenin's tomb, he reviewed each year on Red Army Day men of the Soviet armed forces. Army, Navy and Air Force, all have been fostered by Stalin himself. Until now, they have become one of the greatest military powers in the world. His people regarded as a god this man who was born the son of a shoemaker, for above all, he became a star to guide them to a more prosperous way of life. In return, they gave him their undying devotion and accepted his every word as law. But one thing Stalin did not give them, their freedom. And that, to countries outside the Iron Curtain, means all. Over the years, Soviet propaganda built up a picture of Stalin as a kindly man who loved his people. Yet, when Lenin died, it was he who destroyed those same people, it is believed nearly 7 million of them, to make his position secure as Russia's dictator. And through the 30 years of his rule, he remained unchallenged even by members of the Supreme Council, the Soviet's administrative machine.
With the coming of Putin, their suffer ended a little bit. What Putin did, he gave his people, the Russians, peace during wartime. They have not flourished, but they did not suffer. So that is very important to note. And this is why Putin has managed to keep over 20 years power over the Russian Federation. Don't ever think that Putin is the only one that is guilty for what is happening right now. He is just as guilty as the NATO countries and as the USA. Everything started with Ukraine joining NATO. And that meant that NATO countries and the USA would come and place missiles on his front porch. The only thing he asked is not for Ukraine to join NATO, thus the missiles would not be set at Russia's borders.
And another question, what is it do you think that the West does not understand about Russia or about your intentions? Thank you.
Значит, по поводу гарантий и
Speaking of the security guarantees and what it will depend upon, or if something will depend upon the negotiations, our actions will not depend on the negotiation. They will depend on the unconditional compliance with the Russian security demands today and in the historical context. In this sense, we have made it clear that any further NATO movement to the east is unacceptable. There is nothing unclear about this. We are not deploying our missiles over at the borders of the US. No. On the other hand, the US is deploying its missiles close to our home, on the porch of our house. So, are we demanding something excessive? We're simply asking them not to deploy their attack systems over at our home. What is so unusual or peculiar about that? So, what would the Americans think if we, for example, decided to come to the border between, say, Canada and the United States or Mexico and simply deploy our missiles over there?
The USA wants to be a world leader. But what does a leader do? It leads by example.
On my orders, coalition forces have begun striking selected targets of military importance to undermine Saddam Hussein's ability to wage war.
Bad things that the USA did, the NATO countries did, they disturbed the Middle East, they took down people that were leading those countries. Of course, it was a human rights disaster. But these people, such as Saddam or Gaddafi, they were keeping the place at ease. They were keeping all the mental people not doing crazy stuff, such as bombings in Paris or all kinds of terrorist acts in London, where most probably you like to go for vacation. They did not lead by example with Guantanamo Bay, where they kept terrorists. They may be or they may not be terrorists. They kept them for years and years without legal representation, without trials. And then what is Putin gonna say? Alright, the gloves are off. I can do anything if America is doing all these kinds of things. So he goes into Ukraine, he takes Crimea. Now he invades the whole country. The Ukrainian people, God bless them all. They are very strong people and they will fight this to the end. But unfortunately, this is not a fight between them and Russia. This is a fight between NATO, the USA, and Russia.
Important Russian banks will be excluded from the SWIFT system. We will also ban the transactions of Russia's central bank and freeze all its assets to prevent it from financing Putin's war. There's a range of
Russia was subject to a lot of sanctions. Unfortunately, these sanctions do not go straight to Mr. Putin, they go to the people, to the Russian people. What NATO countries and USA hope is that the people will start to rise and go against Putin. As I have explained to you, the Russian people will have Putin's back because he gave them peace in wartime. And even more important, because they are scared of him, they are scared of his regime. They will not go in the street and claim their rights. They will not be against the war, even with the sanctions that have been imposed on them. So they will suffer because they can suffer. They have a long history of suffering and they will do it. Unfortunately, Putin will not back an inch until he takes all the Ukraine. all the European countries and the USA is sending aid to Ukraine. They are sending weapons, they are sending aircrafts, they are sending drones. But ask yourself, is this the way to do it? Will this stop the conflict? Will sending arms and guns and setting hard sanctions towards the Russian people, will this discourage Putin? No, this will not stop the war. And there will be so many more casualties in the Ukrainian people and the Russian people. What you need to do is to ask your governments for a peaceful resolution. The diplomats are the ones that failed you. Just as in any other situation, we should not have gotten to this. We should not have gotten to war. Somebody was not listening. Somebody did not talk to each other. Your officials from your countries did not have a strong bond between them. This is why we have gotten to the situation that we all are in now. So whether you are a Russian, Ukrainian, Swiss, German, French, British, ask your government for a peaceful resolution. It is the only way that we are not going towards World War III. Use your Instagram account, use your Facebook account, Twitter account, Contacte account. Make the world a better place. Why? Because you just want to live your life. War is ugly, and war leaders do not really care about human casualties, but you do. You don't want to end up in a place where all the governments think they are entitled to start a war. NATO, USA and Putin, they believe that they are entitled to go ahead with an armed conflict. Look at the Americans. They thought they won the Afghan-Iraqi war in a matter of 20 days. 20 years later, what do you have? Chaos around the world because of that? Iraq is now controlled by Iran, and the Afghanistan is once again run by the Taliban? I mean, come on! Do not allow others to decide your fate. Do not agree to the war. Hitler had most of the Germans behind him when he started to ask rights on the Sudetenland. He was backed up by his people. Don't be like the Germans in the 1930s. Say no to the conflict between NATO, USA and Russia. And ask for a peaceful agreement, arrangement, whatever you want it to be called.
Prime Minister, Adolf Hitler is a monster. He's a madman. You cannot give him what he wants. He'll take more and more land. More and more people will suffer. That is the proof.
Unfortunately, it's only the common people that have to suffer for the incompetence of others. Just as the forces of the First World War thought they had all the right to start a war, it is happening the exact same thing now. NATO, USA and Russia believe they are entitled to go ahead with an armed conflict. Do not allow for a situation with no end in sight, because you just want to live your life.
His mouth trembles, but his voice is quiet and steady. And soon I slip to the floor and sit between his knees, and while he reads, his hand falls over my shoulder. So, talking and crying and loving in each other's arms, we fall asleep.
Stop! Before you go, don't forget to subscribe, like, share. Bye.